So they say not to go ahead and make decisions when you're emotionally at a good high or when you're too low. Hey, welcome to another Rare Live conversation with myself, Tony Jalen, and the wonderful.
Danielle Jalen.
Hey, life choices. We've got to make them, and some days we got to make harder decisions versus other days. And today we're going to talk about 5 tips to really help guide you in making those tough decisions. you know, for those of you guys who are joining us live, welcome. Happy Tuesday to you. These calls happen every Tuesday at 12:01 p.m. Central Time. And we're live on YouTube. We are live on Twitter, and we're live in the Rare Light Leaders Facebook community. If you're not part of the group yet, we invite you to go to Facebook in the search bar and type in Rare Leaders, and we will accept you into the group. And there's a lot of exciting things going to happen in that group as well going forward. You know, sometimes like we come to a fork in the road that calls for us to make a difficult or drastic decision, right? And our goals change, our priorities change. We're in different phases of our life. And here's the thing: is like these decisions can actually impact areas of all of our lives, right? Including of those that live around us. Um, so, like for example, this summer, we made the decision to let our son do social media. Like our son's 16 years old, and he's had zero social media up until this point. Like he had the accounts, but didn't really have access to them because we felt like what we see it a lot. I mean, I coach youth sports where I see a lot of people feel like they're getting addicted to social media, right? It becomes their way of getting those positive endorphins to trigger their brain. And what we realize, things change. Like, not everyone's using smoke signals anymore to communicate. Not everyone's just using text messages anymore to communicate. A lot of these youth are using Snapchat groups to communicate. So it was at the end of a tournament, and I sat there going, "Man, he's been a good kid," like rationalizing all the reasons to do it. And I let him download it on his phone, and then okay, we're gonna talk about it. And so we got it. And I'm glad I did do it because it allowed him to communicate with his teammates in a different fashion than before. Um, but what I'm really proud of is how he's handled the opportunity, right? He's not on it all day long. He has a time limit for how long he's gonna be on it, which is pretty cool to see. And so, I like being intentional. We like being intentional with things. So we're gonna go through some suggestions today and help guide you through tough decisions. And this is the first one I actually touched upon it, is look beyond the moment. Like how many times would you say we sometimes have to pay a small price in the short term, but the long term gain could far outweigh the immediate sacrifice?
I think a lot of times that's what ends up happening is that we feel like I don't know. Sometimes it's like a loss of some sorts in the short term, but really to get ahead in the long run makes it a better decision to make.
Mhm. So, like when we made the big move from North Dakota to Wisconsin,
Yeah. Mhm.
folks, let the truth be told that I was offered the opportunity in my corporate world to become a division manager in Wisconsin. We were living in North Dakota in 2010. And it took me a month to come to the decision. And Daniil's like, let's just do it. You're going to say yes. Just say yes. Um, Yet there was comfort, though, in knowing where my surroundings were. Like I was being tested, like, okay, do you want this next level of your life? Or are you going to be okay with being where you're at? And that really applies to us adults, right? I mean, from managing the daily temptations that show up, our daily desires, versus achieving long-term goals, having that extra piece of cake versus not like you're gonna pay now, you're gonna pay later. um, so that's one thing. Looking beyond the moment, I think is so important. And I think, I mean, would you agree that sometimes a sign of immaturity in our decision making is when we make choices only when the present moment is in mind?
Yeah, I think it's a lot to take in to consider, like, yeah, I'm comfortable right now, and oh, this would make me feel great right now, so I'm just gonna do it, versus using that time to, like, think about it, weigh your options, and then make a decision. I know we talk about, like, even, um, 24 hours before sending something that we're upset about or whatever, like, using that same rule of at least 24 hours before making a decision, because things can happen within that 24 hours that maybe present a different opportunity comes up. Maybe it's a better opportunity. Maybe it's a worse opportunity. And then we can see more clearly which decision that is more feasible to make.
Right. I think that comes down to the next part is like number two, tips in guiding yourself making the tough decisions. Evaluating a head choice versus a heart choice. I'm going through that right now.
Mhm.
For those of you guys that are watching for the first time, I also coach youth sports. And this week in Wisconsin is known as tryout week for high school, for volleyball at least. And there's 120 girls trying out for our high school team. That's 120. That's a lot of kids. And some of the kids I've known from past years of coaching, and there's new kids to the program too. And I have a lot of hard choices I want to make, right? But also, you know, that's going back to, the first tip we talked about, looking beyond the moment. Like, you know, it's for this person right here, but what about the program? Because it's more than just one person, right? It's about the program. It's about the team. And I think a lot of times a head choice is a decision that makes a lot of sense on paper, while heart choice is one that speaks to your soul and meets a need or a longing. um, what's the challenge though of making choices with only the heart?
Well, I think then you're looking at, more kind of almost falling into that wanting to please everybody and not being able to say no, um, and ending up stressing yourself out because you did something because you didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings or you want to make everyone happy. And yet, knowing that even though it's a hard decision to make, that in the long run, it may actually be better for that person that you're saying no to. Um, which I too had to kind of make that decision last night talking about stuff because I'm like, I know what our weeks look like. And as much as I want to say yes to something, I have to realistically look at where our week is and would I be serving us? Because what would end up happening is I would be stressed out. And because I said yes when it was a position to say no. So I'd be stressed out and probably snapping at everyone around me because it wasn't the right decision to make just because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings.
Right. Because a lot of times when we make things, I think, from the heart, which I'm a heart person. A lot of people know me as a guy with heart. Um, I think it'll bring you an emotional high at the moment, but it's short lived. It's short lived. And, believe when it comes to decisions, the best decisions often they have both emotional rewards, but they also have to make rational sense as well, you know. And we're not fortune tellers all the time, but you got to put some of the head in there too. And I think this is the next part too, and you actually touched on this. This is number three: is consider if you could survive if disappointed. Like once you decide what the path, like which path to take, like I'm gonna take this path in the road, and you pursue it with everything you got. What if you really realize you made a mistake? Can you survive it even if you feel like you failed? So a lot of people they think about, oh, well, here's what's gonna happen when I do this and everything like that. But also, it's important to weigh the cost of failure. And I'm not talking about like the financial cost, but the emotional cost.
Mhm.
and the time and energy lost. Agree or disagree with that, Danielle?
I think, yeah, I think that kind of goes back to being able to use past failures as lessons and understanding like you may have made a different choice at a different time depending on where your situation was, but like being able to then use that, like if it wasn't the right decision to make at that time, what was the cost of not taking that route?
Mhm.
What have you learned and what can you do differently so
Right,
that if you do come to that point again, you understand like, okay, I'm making this decision. Here's possible consequences that happened because of it in the past. What can I learn from that and use in this next decision that I'm making?
right. Because disappointment comes in, like, with many decisions we make, right? And what I'm hearing you say is you gotta really, like, assess your resiliency and your coping skills when things don't work out the way that we hoped. And here's the thing, I'm thinking, like, if you choose a path that's gonna, like, rock your boat, devastate you, bring you down to your knees, if the outcome is not successful, I don't know if that's probably a wise choice to make that decision. If you think if that's the cost that could be associated with it. Is there so I'm hearing you say, is sometimes you gotta ask the what if questions before taking the plunge forward?
Yeah. Just really like taking, I mean, I think that goes to like making the head decisions, writing it all out and looking at the facts versus what the feelings are because the facts are not going to go away, but your feelings can
Mm.
change.
Ooh, that's good. For you guys watching, write that down. Facts aren't gonna go away, but feelings can change. That's good. That's good, Danielle. That's so true, though. That's so true. Feelings are temporary, but facts remain. I think another thing too is when you're making tough decision. Here's the next step to doing that is you got to respect the effect and the influence of others. And you talked about that too. That decision you had to make last night. You're like, okay, well, I had to look at our week, and I had to look at, okay, really, like, how am I gonna feel those weeks? Like, what's gonna? I mean, you don't always know what your feelings are day to day, but I think it's important. You got to take into account how your decision will affect those around you, particularly family members, aka me, or close friends or associates who could be impacted. Um, like for example, taking the job, right? When I took this role here at Heartland, it affected not only you, but it affected kids, it affected family. Um, I think do you have to like sometimes when you think about respecting the effect and influence of others, how do you factor in the context of the timing of the choice?
Well, I think in that situation, like you look at it, so we still lived at a distance from family. And in reality, it's not like we saw them every single day. We would still see them 3, 4 times a year.
Hmm.
And whether we lived where we were at or we progressed and took a leap into another phase of our life, it wasn't going to change how many times that we were going to see them. It wasn't, even though we were moving away from family and it was sad, like to think about, it was one of those things like in reality, the facts were, it's not like we see them every day.
Hmm.
We still talk on the phone. We still see each other 3, 4 times a year. It wasn't anything different. We were just in a different location.
Yeah. Well, here's one of the final ways to go ahead and make tough decisions to consider. As using this as a guide, go with what you know. I mean, the fact of the matter is, we can never have all the answers surrounding our options and our choices, but we can do some serious research into picking the best option. One of the things I wrote down here is like, decisions should not only be made solely on hopes, wishes, and potential, but also on the facts, like you talked about, that can support the choice if possible. what here's a question I think about, is there evidence that others have gained much from making a similar choice? How can that be a powerful question when you're thinking about go with what you know?
Well, I think if you're looking at bettering yourself and it's a choice to like grow out of your comfort zone or stay where you're at, like obviously looking at other people that had to make similar decisions, like how did that impact their life and what benefits, what setbacks did they have from it? Um, to kind of gauge what it could look like for you, at the same time understanding who you are as a person and how you can make maybe some of those setbacks even step forwards for yourself versus how it may have hindered them. Um, and just taking a look at it from that standpoint of not that you want to compare yourself to other people, but as long as you're understanding, like, here are things that I can gain from it, here are things that they ran into, and so that you can still grow yourself as a person and not stay complacent where you're at.
Yeah. I think too is that to realize that, you're watching this today.
Mhm.
You've had to make tough choices to get to today. And guess what? You survived them. They may have hurt, they may have
Mhm.
sucked, but you survived them. And I think sometimes, life it calls for tough choices, right? It calls for us to get out of our comfort zone. And I'm not going to keep on saying it all the time because everyone's saying get outside your comfort zone, right? And I get it and I understand it and there's truth to that. But sometimes you just gotta go with what you know. And I think you make a good point too, is you can also get counsel from other people who've done it as well. Hey, Danielle, have you ever experienced this situation? If so, how did you handle it? And if you were to go about it again, I love this question. If you were starting today in the same role that you started, you know, 20 years ago, what advice would you give yourself today? Knowing what you know, what advice would you give to yourself to that person 20 years ago? Let's say, for example, for marriage, for relationships. Knowing what you know today, what would you give yourself advice to if you were to start day one again today?
I think just understanding the power of perseverance and being on each other's team no matter what's going on,
Mhm.
um, is probably the biggest key to keep continue moving forward, like, not having that back door or that option, um, removing it completely and just understanding, like, as long as you're on each other's team and you're willing to both work hard and persevere through whatever challenges or good times, that happen and understand that this too shall pass, whether good or bad, that time will pass,
Mhm.
and what's on the other side of it.
Now, I was talking to an individual this morning. He's been married for 50 years, so they've had to make a lot of tough
Mhm.
decisions. And he goes, "Yeah." And his daughter was there too. His daughter he's in his 70s, daughter's in her 40s, I think. And he goes, "Yeah, I remember when, my wife said, hey, you know what? Things got to change or I'm gone." And his daughter said, "Well, that happened last week." But it was interesting about it. It must have been a very pivotal time because he knew, he remembered the month and the year that happened. And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "But we're still here 50 years later." And he was talking about 1989. He told me about it happened in 1989. You know, I'm like, wow, that's like what, 32 years ago, 33 years ago. And I think we all can point to that time in our life when we had to make a tough decision. And I think a lot of times, I just read this book this morning, Think and Grow Rich, and it talked about persistence. Ironically enough, that was like, it came up and he talked about in this book, um, you know, symptoms of lack of persistence. What keeps you from moving forward is failure to recognize and clearly define exactly what one wants. Well, we talk about that often. Lack of interest in acquiring specialized knowledge, indecision, the habit of passing the buck on all occasions instead of facing the issue squarely, you know? Um, the habit of relying upon alibis instead of creating definite plans for the solution to problems, like something you just got to face. The worst place to be is not procrastination, is indecision. And we hope like these tips help you today. I mean, we talked about today, number one, you got to look beyond the moment. We might feel all hunky dory in the moment, excited in the moment, but like Danielle so beautifully said, you know, what did you say? Facts stay, basically, and feelings are temporary. And that's the next point is evaluating a head choice versus a heart choice. I think you have to have a combination of both, right? Yeah, because you want to feel like you made the right decision. And you got to consider next thing is if you could survive if disappointed. Like if it doesn't work out, are you like Danielle said, are you able to handle the flip side of the coin? Not the positive, but also the not so positive. Respect the effect influence of others, and finally go with what you know. Able to go ahead and finish up here, Danielle, in terms of talking about discussion, like 5 ways to go ahead and help make tough decisions. Is there anything or what would you like to add as we finish up here?
Well, I think, to kind of just fall into that empathy standpoint as you're making the decision, what is the other person going to be feeling? And even though you may not be making a decision that favor is in favor for them, how can you at least talk to them or tell them in a way that's not going to completely offend them or let them down, but ways in which like you can still use that as a way to grow and to learn from for them.
That's great. You know, there's this quote that says, whenever you see a successful business or relationship, someone once made a courageous decision. So think about that today. And I think too, my final thought when it comes to this is that always make decisions that prioritize your inner peace. Because once you make it, you make it. It is what it is. We appreciate you guys joining us today for another rare conversation. If you found value in today's conversation, please do share this with others. And when we talk about being a rare leader, if you look at it's rare, RARE, and it stands for a leader who's resourceful, adaptable, decision making, resilient, willing to see through their decisions, and willing to engage with others. So until next time, I am Tony Jalen, joined by the wonderful
Danielle?
and onward and upwards.